Oh,
All right. So, good evening. Before we start tonight, can we give it up to the New York Red Bulls? They're about to face the LA Galaxy this weekend, two original MLS teams, and they can win their first MLS Cup and the Red Bulls. Just
woohoo.
like the Liberty, who won their first title in the WNBA this season, who were an original franchise of that league and have had many great years. Red Bulls, lowest seed ever to make the final. Lowest seed ever. That final, by the way, is taking place tomorrow. If it's anything like the WNBA finals, get ready for a lot of play of the refs. I shudder for that. I have let's not be doing ref talk on this show. I've done that too much already. I'm Steve Rabinowitz.
I'm Jay Kaplan, and Paulie? I told you we'd give you a shout out to your Red Bulls. You're welcome, my man.
Well, I'm into Strait, and yeah, I'm just here, not trying to get fined, and I promise you, I have not planted any flags. I have not given anybody the business. I have been on my best behavior this week.
I have not. So let's get started with the championship college football playoff edition of On the Sports Line. Hey Jay,
Yeah.
Election Sunday is coming. Get excited! It's 12 teams, not
Strange as it is to
8.
hear you say those words in December, I'm really stoked about it.
It is, but it's only 12 teams, not 68. A lot of the usual suspects that we'll talk about, not the craziness of March Madness, but still some craziness. We'll talk some college football weekend, championship weekend edition tonight, and then we'll plant our flag to finish the show with college football false bravado. We'll also talk NFL down the stretch, but for now, let's try to get some of our investment back as we finish off the Danny Dimes era in New York. November 10th. Now, former Giants QB Daniel Jones lost to the Panthers in Joliet, England, and dropped the Giants to a not so jolly 2-8. Then that was their fifth loss in a row at that point. November 18th. Daniel Jones' time as a starter in Giant Blue, done. Bench the fourth string for Tommy DeVito. On November 22nd, in a move that everyone except Tom Brady apparently would agree with, Mr. Jones did not basically like being regulated to the scout team in order to not be injured for management to trigger an injury guarantee in his contract, and therefore he asked for his release. Apparently, unlike the Mr. Jones of the Counting Crow song, not everybody loved him, and he ended up signing with the Minnesota Vikings. Now he's a backup to Sam Darnold in the I Hate New York Football Club. They're the two founding members. That's probably going to be my last paragraph that I ever write about Jones in relation to the G-Men. Here's our final talk about it. Jay, any thoughts as Jones era becomes another error for Big Lou?
Yeah, once the decision was made to bench Jones following the Giants bye week after that 20-17 overtime loss to the Carolina Panthers in Germany, I knew his time here was over. Granted, the case can be made that the decision was based on how poorly Jones has played this season, low-lighted by his 50.5 passer rating against the Panthers and the fact that the team is 3-13 in the games he started over the last two seasons. But as I said to you guys on our NFL midseason report show, if things kept going as badly as they had been to that point, Giants were 2-7 and had one of the worst offenses of the NFL at the time, that no matter how Jones played going forward, the team might eventually bench him for no other reason than that $23 million injury guarantee clause in his contract. Now, Dexter Lawrence, one of the team captains and a fellow 2019 draft pick with Jones, was among the players who were confused and not at all happy about the decision to bench Jones, saying the following, quote, "You've got to respect it as a player, even though you don't like it, because you don't know their full thoughts behind it. To me, the best quarterback on the team," he's referring to Jones, "but they see things differently. I guess that's all that matters. Teams lose games, not just one player, and I think that's how it should be understood." And it's why I believe that Jones getting benched and ultimately dropped to fourth on the depth chart before going all the way to John Mara to ask for his unconditional release, which the Giants granted on November 22nd, was more about money than performance, though I doubt anyone in the organization would ever admit to that. But the lack of improvement at the quarterback position over the last two games, whether it was Tommy DeVito, who got the start in the 30-7 blowout loss loss to Tampa Bay, or Drew Lock taking the snaps in that 27-20 Thanksgiving Day loss to the Dallas Cowboys, anecdotally confirms it for me, as does this pretty incendiary quote from rookie wide receiver Malik Neighbors, who didn't hold back when he was asked about the state of the offense after that loss to the Bucs, saying, quote, I mean, obviously it ain't the quarterback. Same outcome as when we had DJ at quarterback, end quote. Look, quarterbacks in Jones situations take one of two routes. They either look to find a situation that gets them back on the field as soon as possible so they can try and put some better film out there, or they look to find a situation that allows them a complete reset with no pressure or expectation to perform at the level they didn't reach at their previous stop. I'm glad that Jones didn't take the easy way out and go to a place like Vegas or Dallas or Jacksonville. All three would have given him a chance to get back on the field sooner. But the lack of stability that permeates each team would have ultimately been detrimental to his long-term prospects. Following a path similar to the ones taken by Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold, meaning finding a team with a more proven offensive staff that can better aid his development, even if it means being a backup for a while, would give Jones the best chance to resurrect his career, in my opinion. That's why joining the Vikings and Kevin O'Connell's staff is probably the best decision Jones could have made, even if it's just the practice squad to start and possibly for the rest of the season. O'Connell understands more than most what it means to be a struggling quarterback trying to make it in the NFL, as that was his career, one of unfulfilled promise. It gives him a unique perspective on the position, and that awareness and understanding has made him the coach he's become, and why the Vikings have the culture that they do, highlighted by how they go about developing quarterbacks. It's why players like Jones and Darnold before him see Minnesota as a good place to be a quarterback. Vikings run a very quarterback-friendly offensive scheme that plays to each quarterback's strength and puts them in the best position to succeed. Darnold is in line for a pretty good free agent payday if he elects to test the market after the season with what he's done in this scheme so far this year. 67.6% completion percentage, 246 yards passing per game, 8.2 yards per attempt, 23 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, and a 102.5 passer rating. All are easily career highs, and it's a testament to what O'Connell has built. O'Connell really enjoys the coaching and player development aspect of his job, especially with quarterbacks, saying, quote, the player development side and the quarterback development side are a huge passion of mine. I just love getting opportunities to work with guys. Hopefully our system is built to help guys realize their truest potential. It's as simple as that. That's the type of situation that Jones needs to be in, one with an upbeat and experienced quarterback room. Now, he may not suit up for the Vikings this season, but the only quarterback under contract for the Vikings in 2025 is rookie J.J. McCarthy, who's recovering from season-ending surgery this fall to repair a torn meniscus. By all reports, the former Michigan Wolverine is still on track to be ready to pick up where he left off last spring and summer, but Minnesota will probably still need to repopulate their quarterback room for 2025. If Jones fits in seamlessly over the next couple of months, he'd have a chance to be McCarthy's backup next season, helped by the relationship he will have built with the Vikings over these next few weeks, working with McConnell, quarterback coach Josh McCown, assistant quarterback Grant Udinsky, and the rest of the Vikings quarterbacks. Look, a ridiculous amount of coaching turnover, perennially poor offensive line play, and a lack of playmakers were the hallmarks of Daniel Jones' time and as a Giant. That's a situation that is the complete opposite of being conducive to the development of a first-round pick who was expected to be the second coming of Eli Manning, and it led Giants co-owner John Mara to proclaim after the 2021 season that, quote, we've done everything possible to screw this kid up. That's putting it mildly. If ever there was a quarterback who is in dire need of a change of scenery, it's Jones. Landing with Kevin O'Connell and the Minnesota Vikings might be just what he needs to get his career back on track, guys.
Yeah, we'll see what happens, but it's easier to go to a team that has a more stable structure out there, but there seems to be more unstable structures out there, and that leads to a lesser parity in the entire NFL. It's not as easy as, hey, go get better, because nobody's going to want to come to your quarterback room and fix themselves. So that's going to be a little bit of a tougher issue to do. But Jones might find himself very well in Minnesota, and he might get reps if Darnold ever gets injured or if JJ doesn't come back the way he does. Again, that depends on how he values himself this offseason. Anthony, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say this, and Dan, I made jokes about this earlier this season, but Dan Jones' situation as far as like him being a starter and pretty much falling out of favor, it reminded me of Dave Brown back in the 90s. And he
Yeah.
was the guy that was the rookie quarterback who took over for another Giant legend in Phil Simms and had an up and down career with the Giants. Obviously, his rookie season turned out to be his best season by far when he almost led the Giants to the playoffs, even after being benched one game and being kind of inconsistent up and down with his passing. But you can just kind of tell the more the losing set in and the more that it was obvious the Giants didn't have enough around him to
No.
succeed. The defense was young but still building up. Rodney Hampton was kind of headed at the tail end of his career with the knee injuries, and he didn't have any wide receivers to really throw the ball to outside of Chris Callaway, who was pretty much my height if you've seen him up close in real life. But you can just tell the confidence, Dave Brown's confidence was pretty much shot by the time Danny Cannell took over and the Giants kind of went in another direction in the 1997 season. The same thing happened here. I mean, me and Rabbi was talking about that preseason game back in August when he played Houston, and you just saw the throws was kind of the throws were being short. They were off target. Accuracy was never Daniel Jones' his biggest strength, but you just kind of see that he was becoming more and more reluctant to kind of pull the trigger on certain throws. And obviously, the flea flicker against Carolina when there was two guys open and he didn't get rid of the ball and ate a sack, pretty much personified that. But it's no coincidence that his best season when he was a Giant, when they made the playoffs 2 years ago, was with his leg, really. I mean, he only threw for 15 touchdowns that season, but he didn't turn the ball over, and he ran for over 700 yards as a runner. And obviously his high mark as a Giant was that playoff win in Minnesota, coincidentally enough, when he threw for 300 yards and ran for over 100 yards, and the Giants pulling the upset. But also, we forget his rookie season, he threw for 24 touchdowns and played very well. I mean, he had a Saquon Barkley, but also you think about the amount of coordinators that he had to go through as well. I mean, Pat Shermer was his rookie head coach. Dan went through Joe Judge and
Jason Garrett.
Jason Garrett and now Brian Dable taking over this season. It just seems like it was never any stabilization as far as play calling, as far as philosophy, as far as what you want Daniel Jones to do. And obviously you want Daniel Jones to be able to utilize his legs because he's that kind of threat. But at the same time, this is part of the reason why he was getting injured. He missed games. He was on IR because of a neck injury a couple of seasons ago. Last year, you had the knee injury that knocked him out for the season as well. And he's pretty much missed. The only time he played every game was the year they made the playoffs. So obviously, Daniel Jones' play didn't help his cause because it was obvious that that he just didn't have the confidence in his throws and even if the Giants put people around him, and there was receivers that dropped passes too. I mean, Darius Slayton, I don't know what the hell happened to him after his rookie year, but it just tells you that this was a situation that Daniel Jones was just pretty much going to fail in regardless of what the Giants did. And the fact that you see Saquon Barkley having the season he had in Philadelphia, it just kind of magnifies the Giants' decision to give him that contract, being even more of a head scratcher. Like I said, I hope Daniel Jones can build his career back up, maybe get another opportunity elsewhere. But it's clear that that this season, even from the first game against the Vikings, that Daniel Jones was time is ticking, and needed to come in and be successful immediately after knee surgery. I think just all the pressure and everything just finally caught up to him. And look, he handled it with class. I'll say this too: the Giants as an organization handled this entire situation as bad as it gets for a team that needs to move on from another quarterback to another quarterback. The Giants fumbled this completely, and we watched the whole thing on Hard Knocks, so everyone knows the Giants screwed this thing up. But Daniel Jones, I mean, his play did not live up to the expectations. Classy guy, took
The end.
responsibility to the very end. So you gotta give him credit for that. And obviously, he was liked by his teammates, but you can kind of see that his play was beginning to be more and more frustrating to the guys that had to line up with him. I mean, the
I
Giants
think
actually lost a few games this year that was actually winnable, and he didn't throw a touchdown pass at home. So I don't know what else you could do to defend Daniel Jones at this point.
I think what you're trying to say in this situation is that let's first start with the Barkley situation. Saquon Barkley was never going to be anything on the Giants just because they didn't have enough around him.
No,
but
not even.
It's just optics. The optics of what you did in giving Daniel Jones the extension that you did, even if it was the correct thing at the time, which I still think might have been the correct thing at the time, and watching what Saquon has done as the running back position is pretty much being revitalized in the NFL. I'm not saying Tyler Tracy is a very good option at running back and is cheaper as heck, but the fact that you're seeing a division rival having the success with Saquon Barkley when your guy is now gone is just bad optics and puts a lot of pressure on Daniel Jones. That's number one. Number two, the guy was already treated as kind of the next savior of New York because he was drafted sixth overall. He probably wasn't worth that pick, and he was probably more of a second-round quarterback when you think of it. His mechanics were good, but he's not a guy who can be someone who can win you a game all of the time, especially in big situations. And that's one of the reasons why the quarterback is always the second person to go. The first person is the coach. The second person is the quarterback, and that's what happened with Daniel Jones. This was just necessary. All of this was just necessary. We knew this was going to happen.
Yep.
We knew this had to happen, unfortunately. And I don't know if they botched it as much as they could. They probably could have made it a little quieter in terms of how they benched him from first to fourth. They never should have played him another game because, again, you don't want to be on the hook for all of that money.
$23 million.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just this just needed to happen. It happened, and the Giants, they're not in tank mode, but they're not really in we have the best team mode right now. And whether it's getting a quarterback in the draft, which I don't think they should do. I think if they need to they need a temporary quarterback in free agency. It's not guaranteed that they will do that, though.
No.
It's not guaranteed that they won't do that. So we'll see what happens. But overall, what the Giants have done is just necessary. This is the next step. And you might say this possibly happened a couple of months too late. We'll see what happens going forward. But the Daniel Jones error, unfortunately, in New York is over.
Yep.
Unlike years, guys, if you move to college football, unlike years when you can make a 4-team college football playoff without even playing in your conference championship game. Hello, Ohio State.
Yeah.
Or you're playing at best now, you're playing at best in a first-round CFP game in 2 weeks from now. Also, hello, Ohio State. Now, they got to win 4 games, as others only need to win 3. And people that need to win 3 are teams that are going to win on this weekend, title weekend. So we're just going to go through a lot of different games over this weekend. And I'm going to start because I got the biggest one of them all, and that's the SEC championship between Georgia and Texas. We're going to talk about players to watch on both sides of the ball. Now, these two teams, Georgia and Texas, met on October 19th, where Georgia gave Texas their only loss of the season so far. It was really until last week when Texas played Texas A&M, the only real competition that Texas has played so far this season. And that test was a big C- for Texas. Maybe not a net, but a C-. So I'm looking for Texas to see what Quinn Ewers will do. Now, this could be a Quinn Ewers / Arch Manning situation. Arch did some stuff with his feet last week and against Texas A&M. You could see a lot more of him because we saw 7 days ago against Georgia Tech, Georgia was not the greatest with a mobile quarterback, and it took 8 overtimes for them to get past that mobile quarterback in that team with Georgia Tech. The first game, though, that Georgia played Quinn Ewers, as we'll talk about Quinn Ewers first here, was a dominant. Quinn was coming off of an injury. Quinn had to throw the ball 43 times, but 211 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. A lot of that low and garbage time. March Manning had to come in for 6 plays in that game. Both guys had a quarterback rating of 20.3 and 12.3. And as far as I know, that's bad. Mm-hmm. And so I think what Texas is going to need to do this weekend is just establish that quarterback position early and often. This is a game where you're going to want to throw. You're going to be in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. You're not going to have any weather affect you in the winter. And let's see what happens. This could be a slugfest or this could be a shootout. I think in this case, I want to see these two quarterbacks do the best that they possibly can. I want to see a shootout. Now, if Arch Manning comes in and really shines, because we know right now he is the healthier of the two quarterbacks. Quinn is actually going for an MRI later this, I think today or tomorrow before the game to see how badly he's hurt or if he can play fully in that game. Boy, would they like a month to rest, which they will get if they win the game this weekend. It's going to be very interesting to see because the reason how Georgia just punched Texas in the mouth early, and Texas did not know how to play from behind. Texas really hasn't played from behind too much this season. So if they have to come back, they're going to need to see the quarterback help them do that. And Quinn Ewers, who was fantastic last season, winning in Alabama, almost winning against Washington in the Sugar Bowl and the national semifinal. Like to see what happens as Quinn Ewers needs to kind of show me something from the hype that he got in the preseason. So there's Carson Beck of Georgia. Now, Jay unfortunately had to talk about him on the preview show that we did. Don't worry, Jay. I'll give you props for something else in just a little while.
Appreciate that part. Appreciate that.
But I do have to mention Carson Beck has not had a great season. In fact, he has gone from he hasn't been terrible, by the way. When you lose two guys to the NFL and Brock Bowers and Lance McConkey, who are arguably two of the 20 best pass catchers right now in the NFL at this moment, you're going to go from having very few drops to 28 drops from wide receivers this season. One of the tops in all of college football. 64% of his throws is back complete, 7.5 yards pass, a 10 to 12 touchdown to interception ratio. The worst that we saw that was that Ole Miss game back about a month ago, where Ole Miss ended up beating Georgia, and it wasn't really close when you really think about it. But since that game, albeit UMass was one of those opponents, it was UMass, Tennessee, and Georgia Tech. 2 out of those 3 opponents aren't bad. 64% of his passes completed, but 8.3 yards a carry, 1 turnover-worthy throw, no actual turnovers, and 11 touchdowns. So Carson Beck had 3 interceptions in the first game against Texas, including, I believe, that one play that was kind of hanging out there for a while. Texas threw bottles on the field, and then they all of a sudden the stuff said, "Oh, whoops, we made a mistake. That was actually an interception." But Carson Beck for 3 interceptions in that first game. If he can play like the guy who played last year for Georgia, again, they can win the SEC. Georgia can be the 2 seed. Winner of this game will most likely be the 2 seed in the college football playoff, and in my opinion, will have the fast track to be the possible national title winner. This is a huge game, huge stakes. Texas, the interloper, trying to come back. I'm very interested to see how these two quarterbacks do. Kind of a bounce back situation for both.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right. So we got some more stuff to talk about. Starting with the ACC. Let's start with that ACC title held on Saturday night, featuring SMU, a team new to the ACC, who in the beginning of the season, conference stalwart Florida State said SMU is going to hurt the conference overall. SMU went undefeated in conference, and FSU, one I just mentioned, finished at the bottom of the conference table, and in September, SMU beat FSU 42-16. Southern Methodius not hurting the ACC. Florida State Yes, hurting the SEC. Clemson, whose year started out rough by getting blown out by Georgia, ended rough losing to rival South Carolina. But in the middle, 7-1 conference record in between. And after Miami failed to steal their bid a week ago, the Clemson Tigers are in the ACC championship, and that's familiar territory for Dabo and the boys. Jay, familiar faces on both sides to look out for.
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing about this championship game. The 2024 edition will feature one of the ACC's newest teams, number 8 SMU, and they'll take on the conference's most established program over the last decade, in number 17 Clemson. The Mustangs trying to win their second conference championship in a row across 2 different leagues. They were the AAC champion last season, while the Tigers, in their 10th trip to the conference championship game, are looking to bring home ACC title number 9 Saturday in Charlotte. Tigers, as Rabbi noted, have more losses to SEC teams than ACC teams, opening with that regular season loss to Georgia and closing it with the loss to South Carolina. Those 2 losses are the only games against top 25 teams on Clemson's schedule. And they lost their only other game against a team with a winning record when Louisville came into Death Valley and beat them handily. SMU doesn't have a much better resume in terms of quality wins, as the Mustangs' only game against a top 25 team was a non-conference loss to BYU in week 3. That was prior to the change at QB1 that changed their season. Though unlike Clemson, they did manage to beat Louisville, and they did it on the road. That said, this game will feature 2 top 25 offenses, with Clemson ranked number 14 in the nation in points per game at 35.7 and number 8 in the nation in yards per game, 465.7. SMU ranked number 5 in the nation in points per game at 39.2 and number 21 in yards per game at 441.8. The quarterbacks are the driving forces for each offense, so that is who I will be watching. I know y'all are shocked by that. In the case of SMU, it's Kevin Jennings. Now, he took over as SMU's full-time starting quarterback after that loss to BYU in week 3. He'd been sharing snaps with incumbent starter Preston Stone to that point. And the Mustangs have been a totally different team ever since. Jennings is 9-0 as a starter, including 8-0 in the ACC. And from week 4 onward, he's put up 68.7% completion percentage. He's averaged 267.1 yards passing per game, 9.9 yards per attempt, and he has 18 touchdowns against 6 interceptions. That is a 3-to-1 ratio, and a 171.3 passer rating. He is actually 10th in the nation overall in passer rating. And the Tigers offense, and the Mustangs offense has averaged 40.8 points per game, scoring at least 30 in 8 of the 9 games. Now, Jennings has shown that he can beat teams with both his arm and his legs. In the win over Louisville, he was 21 of 27 passing. That's 77.8% completion, 281 yards, 10.4 per attempt. Granted, no scores, but no picks. He did have a 165.2 passer rating, and he was a true dual threat in that game. He had 113 yards rushing on just 10 carries. It's 11.3 per carry, and a touchdown. In conference play alone, 68.3% completion percentage, 283.4 yards passing per game, 10.1 yards per attempt, 16 touchdowns against just 6 interceptions, and a 171.5 passer rating. He topped 300 yards passing in a game 3 times, 3 passing touchdowns in a game 3 times, and a passer rating of 190 or better in a game 3 times. On the Clemson side, it's Cade Klubnik. Now, he is a game-changing veteran quarterback with ACC championship experience. As a freshman, he was named most outstanding player in Clemson's 39-10 win over UNC in the 2022 ACC title game. He threw for 279 yards on 20 of 24 passing. That's 88.3% completion and 11.6 yards per attempt. He had a touchdown, was not picked, and a 194.7 passer rating. He also rushed for 30 yards and a touchdown on 7 carries and actually caught a pass for 19 yards. In theory, that experience should give Klubnik a bit of an advantage, but it'll depend on which version of him, and by extension, Clemson's offense, shows up on Saturday. Now, Clemson was 0-3 against teams with winning records, and their offense managed just 17 points total in those regular season bookend losses to Georgia and South Carolina, and only 21 in the loss to Louisville in conference play. They beat up on unranked and losing teams in the other 9 games. It was very Indiana-like, if you will. Klubnik was the epitome of the extreme versions of the Clemson offense. Check out his splits in wins versus losses and the direct impact on the team's success or failure. Overall, 64.2% completion percentage, average 253 yards passing per game, 7.6 yards per attempt, 29 touchdowns against 5 picks, 149 passer rating. He was tied for fourth in the nation with those 29 TD passes, and his next scoring pass will make him the first Clemson quarterback with 30 passing touchdowns in a season since Trevor Lawrence in 2019. Now, here are those extreme splits I referenced. In Clemson's 9 wins, he put up 66.5% completion percentage. He averaged 265.7 yards passing per game, 8.5 yards per attempt, 28 touchdowns against 3 interceptions, and a 167.3 passer rating. Clemson's offense put up 43.3 points per game, 503 yards per game, and averaged 7 yards per play. In Clemson's 3 losses, Georgia, South Carolina, and Louisville, Klubnik's completion percentage was only 62%. His yards per game passing was just 216.7. His yards per attempt, 5.4. 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, a 106.5 passer rating. Clemson's offense, just 12.7 points per game, 352.3 yards per game, and just 4.8 yards per play. Both of these teams can run the ball as well as throw it. Each has a 1,000-yard running back. For Clemson, it's Phil Mafah, who had 1,078 yards and a 5.4 average in 8 quarters. For SMU, it's Brashard Smith, 1,157 yards on the ground, 6 flat yards per carry, and 14 scores. And their production will be important. But I see this game coming down to which quarterback has the better game. And in the end, right now, I'm giving the edge to SMU's Kevin Jennings. It's going to be an interesting Saturday night, guys.
I always give the edge to anybody that's not Davos Rudy. Maybe he's a transfer portal guy now.
Dabo? Are you kidding me?
I mean,
have you met that boy? Dabo?
I have met that boy. But I do give credit for him. He has bounced back in terms of beating the teams that he's supposed to beat, but
fair enough.
South Carolina loss shows that there's still a lot of more talent in the SEC than there is his program. Anthony, you're up. The Big 12 is Saturday afternoon in Dallas, that championship game. And as the 2-loss Iowa State Cyclones have been a solid conference member for a while, Iowa State has not won a Big 12 title or any conference title in a century. They also face another team who has no Big 12 titles to their credit. That's Arizona State, who also has no Big 12 seasons to their credit to qualify them for an actual Big 12 title until this one in 2024. It's another interloper. Can 2-loss Arizona State go 1-for-1 in Big 12 titles? Winner of this will likely be the 12 seed in the CFP, and the loser can say the words Alamo Bowl to themselves later in the month of December. Anthony, who are you watching for on both sides of the ball here?
Yeah, this is a whole championship game, the personification of the Big 12 conference over the last month. 4 teams is pretty much alive to play in this game, and the Kansas Jayhawks pretty much wrecked two of those teams' seasons with upset wins, and now we have this matchup.
A team didn't actually make a bowl themselves.
No, they didn't. Yeah, they did not qualify for a bowl, but now we have one of the newer members of the conference and a mainstay that hasn't won anything for that matter. But for Arizona State, the guy I'm focused on is Cam Scatterbo, the running back, and he's coming off winning co-offensive player of the week for his performance in a 49-7 win over Arizona last Saturday. He ran for 21 carries, 177 yards, an average of 8.4 yards per carry. Now, I'm sorry, if you're getting 8.4 yards per carry, why would I even throw the ball? I'm sorry, that is a lot. I was watching the highlights of the guy on YouTube. He's Peyton Hillis with sprinter speed. That's pretty much how big he's a big back and hard to bring down. But he also can catch out of the backfield. He only had 1 catch last week, but he does have soft hands. Second week in a row, by the way, that Scatterbo actually ran for 3 first-half rushing touchdowns. First player in Big 12 history to reach that milestone against 2 FBS schools. He's previous one offensive player of the week, November 2nd, after after November 2nd game was Oklahoma State, October 11th against Utah, October 5th against Kansas, and September 7th against Mississippi State. For the season, he's run for 1,398 yards and 468 receiving yards out of the backfield, 19 touchdowns in 11 games. Now, Iowa State's defense obviously has struggled against the run this season. They're ranked 96 in the country in stopping the run. So obviously that's one strength. That's a strength that Arizona State is going to have. For Iowa State, I'm looking at Rocco Beck, the quarterback, who is their strength run up against Arizona State's weakness, which is stopping the pass. Well, Rocco Beck thrown for over 3,000 yards, 20 touchdowns this season. He's also run the ball for 272 and added 7 touchdowns on the ground. And he also has a couple of receivers that's over 1,000 yards that he could go to. Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel were both over 1,000 yards. Although he won't have Jordan Tyson, another big receiving target, broken collarbone done for the year. Last week he rushed for 3 touchdowns and the 29-21 victory over Kansas State that gave the Cyclones the first 10-win season in the program's history. By the way, and here's a fun fact for you Jet fans out there: his dad is Anthony Beck that played for the Jets his first 5 seasons in the league, and is now a color commentator for the team. Now here's the thing, and the Arizona State defense 20 is good at stopping the run, but just 69th and stop against the pass, which obviously this is going to be a match about strength versus strength, and which of those went out to say the least. But when you look at this championship team, the championship game, it's almost like a win-lose situation. You win, you're in the college football playoff, but you're not getting a home game because the Big 12 is more than likely going to be a 12 seed going on a road to start the college football playoff. I mean,
Jeanty does not like the Big 12 this year, Ant.
The committee has not been a fan of the Big 12. The Big 12, to be honest, has not really done themselves any favors. I think BYU probably had the best chance of at least getting a home game, or at least being in the top 4. And then we saw what happened to them. Colorado had an outside chance. They just simply went out. They couldn't get it done. So now it's just simple of, hey, look, one of these 2 teams are going to win and at least be in the college football playoff, which is definitely an accomplishment itself. But you gotta feel kind of robbed when you're a conference champion and you have to go on the road. That kind of feels like when you watch the NFL playoffs and you're an 11-win wildcard team going against a 97 division winner on their turf, even though you had the better season. So that's kind of the feel that this game is going to get. It should be entertaining, though. It's the early afternoon game in Arlington, so I'm definitely going to be looking forward to it.
Yep.
It's interesting how the Big 12 has kind of evolved into not even just the 4th best conference, but like the 5th or 6th best conference out there. And it has nothing to really, it just has to do with the sections of a lot of teams, and most of the teams that are doing well this year are teams that weren't even there last year. You saw how much Colorado struggled in the Pac-12 last year, and they get a Big 12 schedule, and now Shedeur Sanders is going to be a top quarterback, and Travis Hunter is going to be a Heisman winner just because of how that happened. I'm not saying he doesn't deserve the Heisman. I'm just saying he had a conference that wasn't as strong as the Pac-12 was last year. But I wouldn't count out that Pac-12 winner because they're most likely going to end up going to Notre Dame. And we know Notre Dame's one loss this year was to Northern Illinois, who didn't end up even being a good MAC team. So we'll talk about that more next time we talk about, because I have some feelings about that when we get to it.
Yeah.
So,
by the way, I got to give a shout out. I got to give a shout out to one of my favorite MLB personalities, Sarah Santos. She is an Arizona State Sun Devil alumni. So, I gotta throw that out there. Favorite MLB NHL personality. So I have to do that. Shout out.
Of course you do.
You gotta do it.
Of course you do.
I have to do that.
Of course you do. Okay, let's move on, please. All right, so we have 2 other games to talk about for this championship weekend. So We'll get to that in just a moment, but I would like to interrupt with my own talking point really quickly about the teams that are not there. And one of the biggest controversies this whole week is a team from down south in Tuscaloosa, Alabama,
Roll
known as the
Tide.
Alabama Crimson Tide. No, no roll tide. No roll tide at all. 9-3, currently in the playoff picture. They are the 11th seed in the bracket, the 11th team out there. Honestly, when it came down to the four teams who were in contention for that, you couldn't lose, you couldn't win. Everybody hates Alabama, and everybody, I think we were even talking last week about, why is the committee evaluating wins and losses when it's what team is the best team? And when you think about it, when you compare Alabama and, sorry, Nisa Petrilli, please don't listen to the next 5 minutes if you're listening to me. When you compare Alabama to Miami and the way Miami has played this year, Miami does have that gusto at certain points of the game, but they also have a defense that is Swiss cheese light. Actually, it's not even Swiss cheese light. It's Swiss cheese full. You can get a touchdown from that team in Cam Ward at any time, and you can give up a touchdown from that team at any time. And it kind of bit them last week against Syracuse. And while they're a 2-loss team and Alabama is a 3-loss team, all teams are not created equal. And again, you can literally roll a dice for me to determine which team is the better team out there. Alabama's ranked higher. I probably would have done the same thing, although it would have been close. But you know what? And also, by the way, bringing in Mississippi and South Carolina in here for a second, Mississippi's losses are just as bad as Alabama's losses. Mississippi lost to two teams out there, lost to Kentucky, and lost to LSU, which is the greatest loss in the world. Alabama did lose to Vanderbilt and Oklahoma, but they have the win. They have the Georgia win, and then they have the Missouri win where they just dominated a team that is going to be a top 25 team out there this year. But overall, Alabama is the team that needs to watch their back this weekend on two fronts, and they're both via the ACC. SMU loses, and Clemson is automatically in, probably as either the fourth seed or the 12th seed. That means SMU goes to a vote, and SMU currently ranked 8th, and they have more of a resume, so to speak, although their really only loss was to a top 25 team. But not supposed to punish too many teams if they make their championship game and lose, especially when they were a one-loss team and made their championship game and lose. That's number one. Number two, and this is something I really hope that happens, what if the committee just decides to put Miami back over Alabama? I know that they mentioned in the shows, in all those recap shows that Ward Emanuel, their committee chair, basically said, there's no more data points to determine who's the better team out there. You know what? I truly think when you do this for the first time, you're really just putting everything into a cauldron and then immediately picking something up and seeing what comes out. So I would not be surprised if there ends up being some volatility out there and Alabama doesn't hear their name called on Selection Sunday. Yes, still calling it Selection Sunday, even though the real Selection Sunday is in 3 months from now. But I'm very much interested to see what Kalen DeBoer's first year in Alabama ends up at. It's either going to end up as 10 or 11 seed, who's going to have a tough first round game, possibly going to Notre Dame, possibly going to Penn State. Alabama, Penn State, isn't that a juicy matchup in late December to watch on Penn State's home field? Or does Alabama end up as a 3-loss team that's going to be trying to book Orlando for a New Year's Day bowl that doesn't really mean anything when it comes down to it? I'm interested in that. We'll talk about that when we get there. But I want to kind of mention that.
It's definitely going to be interesting. And I'll say this one thing about the way the committee has kind of handled themselves, and it's part of the reason why. And there were expected to be some hiccups. It's the first time they're doing it with a field this size. But I think one of the things that has annoyed, coaches across the country whose teams have been, involved in the conversations is that they don't seem to have a full understanding of what the committee is actually using. When we talk about it in comparison to college basketball, we have all of these efficiency sites, right? We talk about Warren Nolan, we talk about Ken Palm, we talk about
Also, by the way, there's 68 teams. So again, you're going to argue with
that's true.
By, those things are going to fall on deaf ears when it comes to who's number 55.
No. I'm not arguing that point, Rabbi. We've been having the conversation about the team that's the first of the teams that are first four out of complain no long and loud that that they got screwed. But here's the thing. We don't seem to have those type of sites for college football. Not really. It doesn't seem like any type of strength of schedule data is being used. And unfortunately, where there seems to be more transparency on the college basketball side, granted they've been doing it longer, there seems to be a lack of it on the college football side. And I think that's what has everyone up in arms, is that we don't really have a sense of what the committee is really using for criteria. So it's kind of hard to get a handle on how they're coming to it. Granted, there's nothing that resembles quad 1 through quad 4 like we have in college basketball. And I think, does that mean that somewhere down the line, college football goes somewhere along that route to have those type of data points to use? Who knows? We all knew that the first year of this 12-team playoff was going to have some hiccups. It'll be interesting to see, no matter how it shakes out, whether it's Miami back in, whether it's SMU as an at-large bid, or whether it's, Alabama, raging, yeah, we may be a 3-loss team, but look at all of our top 25 wins and our SEC, resume. Whether that's how it shakes out, it'll be interesting to see how the committee course corrects going forward to kind of give all of us a better sense of what criteria they're using to determine who's last in and who's last out.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of what you just said, Jay. And in the case of college basketball, yes, we had the quad ones and everything, but you always feel like the teams are going to ultimately determine it on the basketball court. In this case, Ohio State literally got beat by, sorry, Jay, a 7-5 Michigan team. And got rewarded for it.
Say it again, only slower for Jay. He'll hear it all.
You kidding me? I'm still pinching myself that actually happened. And honestly, that is the worst possible thing that could have happened to Ohio State last weekend, because it knocks them out. We all, the way the season was unfolding, we're like, yeah, it's going to be Oregon, Ohio State in the Big Ten title game. That's going to be a hell of a matchup, to determine who's probably the number 1 overall seed in the CFP. But now this happens, and Ohio State has to sit home. And granted, they're still in, and they're still going to be a high seed. But at the same time, they literally, this is the worst thing that could have happened to them, and they're in the same boat as other teams where you have no more ability to make your case. You are now at the mercy of everything else that happens to other teams, not only in your conference's title game, but in the other conference title games that are happening around you.
Yeah, and it does seem like, and we saw this with the we saw this with the college football playoff with the 4 team. It just seemed like every year the criteria keeps changing. The committee is looking for something different instead of sticking to at least some kind of foundation of what we are going to look for. I mean, we literally saw one year that they were trying to emphasize conference champions, and then the very next year we saw 2 teams in the same conference playing a 4-team college football playoff. So it's like, okay, you gotta help everyone else out by at least getting to the bare bone of what exactly are you looking for. At least in college basketball, yes, we know we have the criteria and the resumes and all this, and ultimately teams get left out. But the teams know, okay, this is what the committee's gonna look for. We know what we have to do when we take the court, X, Y, Z. In the case of college football, it's almost like, okay, we have to win, and there's a guarantee that we win because there may not be enough style points to go along with that, and that's the problem that I think that the committee just hasn't quite figured out, regardless of what playoff system has been there. And this is the first year, and there's going to be a lot of hiccups and a lot of quirks that's going to come into play. But it can't be changing as far as what the teams have to do every year to make this field. I mean, Alabama has been constantly scrutinized for basically for cupcaking the schedule for
Mercer.
they beat the hell out of Mercer and suddenly gets rewarded for that. But yeah, they've been criticized for years over that. And you see the SEC bias and whatnot that we saw in years past. And it's just I'm not saying it for this year, but I'm just saying like they got to figure something out.
That's fine. They deserve the bias, honestly, in my opinion.
By the way, I'm trying not to talk too much because Roll Tide, Miss Sharon's around. I don't want to set her off tonight. So
Miss Sharon, yeah, Miss Sharon's probably not going to get going to miss the playoff on Sunday. Yeah, so let's keep Miss Sharon at bay here and talk about some more stuff going into this week. And Anthony, switch over to the Big Ten and distract. The Big Ten is between the Big Ten Championship is between the only undefeated team in college football in this 2024 season. That's top-ranked Oregon, and one-loss third-ranked Penn State. Penn State's record over the last 3 seasons has been flawless if you don't include games against Ohio State, Michigan, or bowls. That's everything that counts. This doesn't fall into one of those 3 categories, but for respectability, I think Penn State may need to win this one. So, Anthony, I'm going to ask you this. No players here, regardless of what happens on Saturday. If Penn State even pulls off an upset, is Oregon the favorite going into the CFP?
Ooh, tough question. I would say they still are, but I think a win in the Big Ten championship game pretty much solidifies them as an overall favorite. And there's a reason why they overtook Ohio State as the betting favorite this year. By the way, times has changed. We realize Brad Nassler and Jerry Danielson is going to be in Indianapolis and not Atlanta, Georgia tomorrow. Times is completely different this time around. But besides the point, I mean, the Oregon really doesn't, and I agree, and actually I have to agree with Gary Danielson because I saw him in an interview earlier this week. The Ducks don't really have much of a weakness. I mean, they have an explosive offense led by Dylan Gabriel, who just seems like he's been in college football forever at this point. I mean, he's 23 years old, and he brings that leadership quality and I've been here before factor to the quarterback position. I mean, Central Florida 1 year, Oklahoma before transferring to call Eugene his home and finally eligibility. They're the only undefeated team left in the nation. I mean, 12-0 is 12-0, regardless of how they get there. They could be the first team to beat Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State in the same season.
Yep.
Which has not happened.
And first year in the conference to boot.
First in the conference, no less.
Another first-year interloper in their championship.
That's right.
Yeah, he's completed 70% of his passes, 24 touchdowns this year. And also, they have Jordan James on the ground, who's run for over 1,100 yards, 1,166 yards as well. An offensive line that started the season giving up 5 sacks. They gave up 7 sacks in the first 2 weeks. Have only allowed 5 the rest of the season. That offensive line has completely done a 180 the last couple of months, and they have a defense that can get after the quarterback and that can rush the quarterback, led by Jordan Burch. This is going to be a good game. And the fact that Penn State also have a defense that can get after the quarterback, so it's going to be which offensive line hold up. But in the case of the Ducks right now, I think a win pretty much solidifies that they are going to be the betting favorite. If they lose, they'll be one of the teams you have to look at in that conversation. But just the wacky, this wild and crazy college football season, especially in the last month. What we think we know about our team has completely gone 180 the next week. Hey, look, we thought Ohio State would be in this game. Look what happened. That just tells you that nothing is for sure. But if the Oregon does too. I mean, for them, they want to have the least resistant path to the national championship game, and obviously being the 1 seed overall, and having a week off, and the other teams beat each other up in the first round. I mean, you definitely want that without question, and also, and that kind of gives you the least, the least resistant path to the championship, which is the whole thing about being the top team in a playoff field. You want to earn that, and I think the Ducks, they're one of the favorites without question. But a win tomorrow night pretty much guarantees that they're going to be an overwhelming favorite going into the college football playoff.
Yeah,
it's going to be interesting to see because just remember the national title game this year is all the way out east in Georgia. They'll probably be able to play in the Rose Bowl, but after that they can go Rose, but then they're going either Midwest for their semifinal in the Cotton Bowl, and then they got to go to Georgia for their national championship.
By the way, did we see the Oregon Ducks uniform choice tomorrow night? Wow, they have a lot of uniform combinations.
They break out a new one?
Of course they did. They always break out a new one. That's that Nike money, baby. By the way, shout out to another conference interloper who's actually leading 35-7 right now in their conference championship game, Army, who is going to be the American Athletic Championship Conference Championship in their first year in that league. Okay, let's finally talk about them boys from Boise State who are looking very likely to be making the playoffs. Jay, as I pull this up over here, trying to get the stats for Mr. Jeanty.
Oh, I've been watching
this game. I know you have, but I still have myself. Most likely, by the way, from Boise State and UNLV, the Mountain West teams with only 1 and 2 losses of the year will be either a CFP possible berth for the Running Rebels or a top 4 seed for Boise State. That screams the word Heisman to me.
Yep.
Speaking of, with the numbers that running back Ashton Jeanty is having in 2024, with just an almost, 185 yards and a touchdown tonight, no big deal. That's the one you talked about, by the way, way back in our college preview show in 2024. See? Back there. But is this the chance for Ashton Jeanty tonight with this performance to possibly strike his own Heisman pose next week when we get to New York City and the Nokia Theater?
Yeah, it's rare that I have, that type of presence of forethought, but look, and no disrespect.
By the way,
yeah,
shout out to Anthony, who also had the presence of forethought to actually have the guy who's the favorite for the Heisman, Travis Hunter.
Yeah. So, and no disrespect to Travis Hunter, Colorado star, wide receiver, cornerback. After all, he was our non-quarterback Heisman candidate to watch pick on our college football preview show. And he did go out with a bang in the Buffalo's final regular season game. 10 catches, 116 yards, 3 touchdowns on offense, 2 pass breakups and an interception on defense. But I don't think any player in college football is more responsible for his team's success than running back Ashton Jeanty of Boise State. Now, I said on that same college football preview show that Jeanty, coming off a season where he had 1,347 yards rushing and 14 touchdowns, along with 569 yards and 5 touchdowns receiving, leading the nation, averaging 159.7 yards in scrimmage per game. Had at least 100 yards from scrimmage in 10 of the 12 games he played, including 4 games of 200-plus yards, was arguably the best running back in the nation. This year, in my humble opinion, he's arguably the best player in the nation. The Broncos offense goes through him, even though every opponent opposing defense knows he's getting the ball. They still could not stop him this season. He led the nation, 312 carries, 2,288 rushing yards, 7.3 yards per carry, and 190.7 yards per game. 28 touchdowns on the ground, 29 total. He topped 200 yards rushing in 5 games. His lowest total in any game was 127 in the Broncos' 56-14 win over Portland State, and he did it on just 11 carries in less than a full game. That's 11 and a half yards per carry, y'all. He had 4 games where he averaged 10 yards per carry or better, had only 1 where he averaged less than 4 yards per carry. Not sure how you can lose ground in a Heisman straw poll in the media outlets after putting up 226 yards rushing and a touchdown in Boise State's regular season finale victory over Oregon State, but somehow he did. as all 27 writers and editors who voted this past week in the Athletics Heisman Trophy straw poll gave all of their first place votes to Hunter. Now, Jeanty gets to make one last impression on all the Heisman voters tonight as the number 10 Broncos are playing number 20 UNLV, the only team to hold Jeanty to under 130 yards and under 4 yards per carry in any full game he played this season in the Mountain West title game as we speak. A rematch from week 7 where Jeanty's 1-yard fourth quarter touchdown run was the difference. It's being played in front of a national TV audience on Fox, so it's not just the voters who will get to see that last impression. What would that impression have to look like? Well, according to Joe Rexrode, senior college football writer at The Athletic, it would have to be, quote, the running back performance equivalent of supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Like, how about 341 yards to reach 2,629 on the season and break Barry Sanders' single-season NCAA rushing record? If that's what it'll take against the Rebels, and I don't know if it's going to take that, against a run defense ranked number 10 in the nation. So far, I think Jeanty's making a hell of a final impression. We're about to hit the 4-minute mark. The Broncos are up 21-7, and Jeanty has 185 yards on 27 carries. That's a tick under 7 yards per carry and a 75-yard touchdown run. No matter what, Ashton Jeanty knows he has a ticket to New York in his future, and I can't see him finishing any worse than second in the voting. The race for this year's Heisman Trophy is far and away between him and Hunter, and other than maybe Miami quarterback Cam Ward, no one else is really anywhere close. And the Canes' loss to Syracuse hurt him. And while I understand the allure of a true two-way player having the type of season that Hunter has had, helped along by having Neon Dion as his coach and hype man, my vote, if I had one, would go to Boise State's number 1 Bronco.
Which means you would be on like the 29 voters in the Athletic, probably this and next week also. By the way, they'll have a very good chance, probably in the Fiesta Bowl, which will be a playoff quarterfinal, to break that record to Barry Sanders. Awesome. Will be about 150 to 160 yards because those yards still count in your stats. All right, let's go to the National Football League. I truly thought we'd have more playoff races to talk about here. Note to self, revisit the rundown on the Monday before the show and maybe redo some things, but let's talk about this anyway. The AFC East has been won. The Texans are by default the best team of the AFC South. The Chiefs have the AFC West due to some deal with the devil with all of their wins. How can you explain all of that? Bo Nix has helped the Broncos. No, you don't have to. But you will. You don't have to. Bo Nix has helped the Broncos in good playoff position, predicted by no one outside of the household of one Mr. Sean Roman. The Eagles have the NFC East due to their deal with taking away running backs from terrible franchises on 25 cents on the dollar. And who the hell cares about the NFC South? Nobody. Sorry, Kirk. Sorry, Baker. We don't care about you enough for this segment. But Jay, you care enough about the top seed for the AFC.
Yes, I do. You know, I've said this on our NFL kickoff show every year since Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid won their first Super Bowl together. The AFC's road to the Super Bowl runs through Kansas City, and this year is no different. Though you wouldn't know it from the games the Chiefs have played this season. They're 11-1, and they've clinched a playoff spot, as you said. And it seemed like they've done it with smoke and mirrors and by hook and by crook with, as I said on a previous show, a side order of Mahomes magic. They've clinched a playoff spot, but the number 1 seed is very much up for grabs as the 10-2 Buffalo Bills, who circle the wagons like nobody else, are nipping at their heels with Josh Allen once again seemingly doing it all for them, as evidenced by his recording a touchdown pass, a touchdown run, and a touchdown reception in the win over the 49ers in what seemed like a ton of snow last week. Allen and the Bills won the regular season matchup against Kansas City 30-21 back in Week 11 in Buffalo, but we all know it's what happens in January that counts. And while the Chiefs marched into Highmark Stadium and showed us all they can win a playoff game away from the friendly confines of Arrowhead Stadium, I'm sure the Bills still want the home field this January. Now, the 9-3 Steelers are the unexpected entrants in the AFC's race for the number one seed, having won 6 of their last 7 and taking over first place in the AFC North from the 8-5 Ravens, who've lost 2 out of their last 3, including 1 to Pittsburgh, despite keeping the Steelers out of the end zone. While the Steelers' offense has become a legit unit with Russell Wilson at quarterback, their season highs of 44 points and 520 yards of offense, 414 courtesy of Wilson's arm, along with his 3 touchdown passes, in their win over the Bengals last weekend being the latest proof, alongside their usually stalwart defense, and a win over the Browns on Sunday would give them a full 2-game lead in the division. I'm not holding out much hope that they can overtake the Chiefs or the Bills for the number one seed. Pittsburgh has a gauntlet ahead of them in weeks 15, 16, and 17. At Philadelphia, at Baltimore, home for Kansas City before finishing the regular season at home for the Bengals. I see them maxing out at 12 wins if things break right, and that may not be enough to get the number one seed. The Bills, who already clinched both the playoff spot as well as the AFC East crown, have been running roughshod over teams in their current 7-game winning streak, putting up 30 points in each of the last 6. And they have a favorable schedule down the stretch, though the first 2 could be troublesome. They have to go out to SoFi Stadium to take on the Rams, and then they have to go to Detroit to take on the 12-1 Lions. After that, they close with a home-and-home with the Patriots, sandwiched around a home game against the Jets. If they come out of these last 5 games with a 4-1 record, that's 14 wins, and that may very well be enough to take the number one seed. I said at the top that the Chiefs have built their 11-1 record with smoke and mirrors and by hook and by crook, and that's not hyperbole. The numbers tell the story. KC is 11th in the NFL in point margin at only plus 54. Per True Media, since the year 2000, 23 teams have won 11 more games by week 13. The Chiefs' point differential is last among those teams by 34 points. Only 3 of the teams had a point margin of less than 100. You want contrast? Prior to their win over Green Bay on Thursday Night Football, the Lions were the only other 11-win team in the NFL. Their point margin was plus 180. Patrick Mahomes is 17th among qualified quarterbacks in the NFL in passer rating at just 92.2. The defense, 27th in EPA at minus 7.5 since week 8. On paper, none of this is a recipe, for a deep playoff run, especially when you consider how many of their wins came down to the final play and in ways that even Hollywood couldn't script. Chiefs are 9-0 in one-possession games. They beat the Ravens in week 1 due to an overturned touchdown at the buzzer. They beat the Bengals in week 2 with a 51-yard field goal at the buzzer. They beat the Falcons in week 3 with a run stop on 4th and 1 in the red zone in the final minute. Beat the Bucs in week 9 with an overtime touchdown. Beat the Broncos in week 10 by blocking a field goal at the buzzer. Beat the Panthers in week 12 with a field goal at the buzzer from their backup kicker. And beat the Raiders in week 13 due to a botched snap by Vegas in the final seconds. No team has shown more of an ability to flip the switch down the stretch and into the playoffs than the Chiefs. And with Mahomes as their Mariano Rivera, they fully believe any close game is theirs for the taking, either by making plays at winning time or by their opponent making a mistake that costs them the game. Their last 5 games are filled with an eclectic mix of opponents. Home for the Chargers, at the Browns, home for the Texans, at the Steelers, home for the Broncos. The Browns would seem to be, on paper, the only easy game, though with Jameis Winston slinging the ball for Cleveland, who knows? But
you don't know the Jameis Winston experience.
They're about to get the full Jameis. But KC needs to go 4-1, in my opinion, to hold the 1 seed. I don't think 3-2 will be enough. The Bills have the tiebreaker if both teams finish 14-3. The fight for the AFC's number 1 seed may ultimately come down to the 2 teams we expected to contend for it back in September, but that won't make the next 5 weeks any less boring.
So 2 stats that I found very interesting. I know you haven't said one of them. I don't know if you said the other one. Only 11 teams in the history of the NFL have won 9 one-possession games in the season. And the only one that has is the Oilers of 1978. So there's a chance that the Chiefs could break that record. And
wow, that's going back.
The most impressive record is this. The last 14 times, the Chiefs have been in a one-possession game, they've won. That is an insane stat, and that's almost a season worth of one
Yeah.
possession game.
Yeah.
But
It's crazy to me because there's no way they should be able to keep winning this way, and yet they keep doing it.
you say the word championship DNA, there's the best
There it
example
is.
right there. So Anthony, the NFC Lions also won again last night. Now 12-1. Can't believe I'm saying that in the year of our Lord 2024. They've got some challenge from the Eagles and even in their own division with the Vikings, Anthony.
Yeah, if the Kansas City Chiefs are what I call the MacGyver of football, where
Yeah.
they just put
Good.
together wins by any means necessary to give them an avocado and bubble wrap, and it just turns to a bomb. Dan
Yeah.
Campbell, somebody should call Gavin Anonymous on Dan Campbell because he's going to give Lion fans ulcers before the season's over because it's like, at some point, you can't go with conventional wisdom and maybe put the ball deep in your own end zone and not give the other team a short field like he did last Sunday against Green Bay. But yeah, that was a big win by the Lions. They won their 11th game in a row. And how big was that? It pretty much knocks the Packers out of contention for the division, but it also keeps them ahead of the Vikings, who are just leading the Buzz right now. And the Lions have the toughest schedule remaining out of those three teams. They beat Green Bay. They have Buffalo coming into town next week, which is, by the way, coincidentally enough, is directly connected to what the Kansas City Chiefs and teams in the AFC North are dealing with as far as trying to get the number one seed. But the Lions also end the season at home against the Vikings, so they pretty much have control of their own destiny. As far as being able to wrap up the one seed, and they have matches with the Bears and the 49ers, who by the miracle of the football guys are still alive to win a division, even though half their team is pretty much on IR at this point. But then when you look at the Vikings schedule, a little softer, but they play the Packers the week before the week 17 to end the season. So I mean, the week before the final regular season. So obviously, one of those teams is going to have to lose, and that actually helps the Lions in a capacity, especially if it's the Vikings that ends up losing. The biggest challenge for the Lions is going to be whoever comes out of the NFC. And right now, the Eagles are just as red hot as the Lions. They've won 8 games in a row after a 2-2 start, and one of the biggest tiebreakers are conference record. The Eagles' 2 losses are within the NFC. So that is an edge that the Lions do have over Philadelphia in the event of a tiebreaker. And they play Washington. Let me see. They do play the Eagles just in a couple of weeks. So there's a lot of things that's still up in the air. But right now, unlike the AFC, well, for whatever reason, the Chiefs still find ways to win games. The Lions have been kind of sticking to who they are, their personality. They've played well. They've had Jared Goff has played very well, very poised, under control. The defense has literally played well despite having to bring guys off the street because they lost so many guys, so many players off the season. The Sonic and Knuckles backfield has been productive as ever. And Dan Campbell, despite his gambling ways, have not shot his team in the foot just yet. But right now, the Lions have the inside track, and we saw what Ford Field looks like in the postseason last year in those 2 playoff games. And imagine the road to the Super Bowl, the NFC, going through the Motor City. You got Eminem and Toll. You got the Lions faithful there. That has been a long suffering fan base, and this is a team that is pretty much playing like a 1 seed in the NFC, but it's not over yet because the Eagles are right there. Minnesota's not going away with their defense, and Sam Darnold, we mentioned early in the show, playing very well. It's going to be a really fun race to the end. But every team pretty much have control of their own destiny. You win your games that the Chiefs over their made. That's just how the schedule have worked out for each of these teams, and the fact that each of these teams kind of play each other and can take care of themselves and won't have to scoreboard watch.
one thing that's actually interesting is that you didn't bring it up. Detroit right now, going into last night's game, had 13 members of their defense on injured reserve. The next highest amount of players on injured reserve for any team is 7. 6 less. Defense does not win championships, apparently, so far, although last night saw a lot of holes in that defense.
Yeah.
Why that ended up 34-31, not anything other than that.
Well, I mean, Jordan Love is not exactly an average quarterback. He's pretty good. I mean, he
He
up
was, but
31.
remember, he only completed 3 passes in the first half. That team just had to like warm themselves out as the game went on. So we'll see how that happens. All right. Finally, I would like you to enter the world of the clusterfuck. That is the NFC West. Welcome to the NFC West, the division that sometimes can give you 3 playoff teams like it did one year, and has teams that are very, very good. And this year, they're very, very mediocre. Some of that is not their own doing. Take a look at the San Francisco 49ers. Injury is all about. They lost Brock Purdy for a week, but they really haven't had Christian McCaffrey at all this year. They only had it for 3 weeks. Now, you can see it is pretty much over. They lost Jordan Mason, their next running back. So now they have to deal with a 3rd-string running back in Isaac Morendo, and eventually that comes back to haunt you. Lost Brandon Ayuk early in the season. So it's just been a year from hell for San Francisco. They really just haven't gotten out of their own way, and they've lost games that they could have easily won. Losing at home to Arizona, losing at home to Seattle. That's the big game out there. Lost at Minnesota, lost at LA. They're still in it, but they are pretty much hanging on a thread. They play on Thursday Night Football this week. They have actually the schedule. They play Chicago, LA, and unfortunately for them, Detroit at home on December 30th. But I would not count them out, but I would probably count them low on the totem pole in this situation because this is just a season that just hasn't clicked for them at all. Probably Brock Purdy's best season, but just hasn't been clicking for them at all. Next up, we have the Los Angeles Rams. They had their injuries early in the year, started out 1-4. They got Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua back, but they lost in weeks 1 and 2, respectively. And then they went on a little bit of a run. They've won 5 of 7 since then. Lost at home to Miami on Monday Night Football. That's going to be a big loss when it comes down to it. They have a tough schedule, though, and it really has they have Buffalo coming in this week in San Francisco. Matthew Stafford has had an up and down season. You saw the first half of their game last week against New Orleans. That's probably not the LA Rams team that you would like to see in that situation, but overall, you know how this team is firepower-wise. They have the best offense out of any of these teams, so they can make a run, but it has to fall in place for them. The big thing is they have that win early in the season against Seattle at Seattle in overtime. They'll play them in the final week of the season. That could decide the division, possibly. Arizona has been a good story. It was good that Arizona kind of stuck with Kyler Murray out there. Got him a wide receiver, Marvin Harrison, in the NFL draft. They started 1-3, won 5 out of their next 6. Now they lost 2 tough games at Seattle and at Minnesota. Almost a must-win game for the division this week. Again at home against Seattle. If they could win that game, they're home for New England, at Carolina, at Los Angeles versus San Francisco. That's just about as easy as the San Francisco schedule I mentioned. Arizona, if they can stay out of their own way, and if they can keep Kyler Murray away from any Call of Duty releases that are coming up in the near future, I think they'll be fine. I think the running game is pretty good. Their defense has been solid this year. Love Buda Baker at safety. But this team is still struggling, but I think they could do the best. They can possibly win this division. Again, I can make a case for all of those teams. Seattle is almost doing it by hook or crook. If you watch the game they played against the Jets last week, they look terrible out there. Geno Smith is almost like the new Ryan Fitzpatrick, the no, 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 no. Yes, quarterback. We know what he can do, but he's not consistent in any way, shape, or form. And that schedule is also that easy. You also have games at home against Green Bay and Minnesota over the next 2 weeks. And again, they basically tried everything they could early in the game to give the game to the Jets last week. And Aaron Rodgers didn't throw that pick six. They'd be down 28-3, and they would pretty much have been done in that game. So you just put the 4 names in the hat and you tell me who's going to win the NFC West. I dare you to tell me who's going to win the NFC West. You need to have confidence. But this has taken so many twists and turns this year. It's been a soap opera. I'll even say it out loud. I would not be surprised if the 49ers came back and won this division, because I can't see two divisions, like the NFC South and the NFC West, having mediocre division champions and hosting home games against teams like Minnesota and Green Bay and surviving into a divisional weekend. I just don't see that happening. The NFC West has finally shown us that we actually have a division race this year. Get to it, boys.
I will say this. For Kyler Murray, keep him away from Call of Duty. If you want to motivate him, just say, if you win, we'll take it to another pizza shop here in New York, because he clearly loves New York style pizza. But no,
good idea.
Yeah, but look, the NFC West, every team is flawed. I mean, if ain't injuries, it's inconsistency. It's galore. And it's the same thing in the NFC South. I mean, the only team that is hard to watch, and they've actually played well as of late, is Carolina, because they were so bad at first half of the season. But we're just talking about the college football playoff, like the Big 12 winner having to win a conference and be a road team. Well, congratulations to the winner. This is life in the NFL on a year-to-year basis, where you have a possible mediocre division winner hosting a team that's actually capable of winning the Super Bowl, like Minnesota, who's already at 10 wins. That's just how the playoff field falls. But yeah, the NFC South, the NFC West is just, I can't even tell you who is the best team in this division, because they've all shown signs of being, excuse my language, really shitty at some point. The 49ers, you couldn't name a starter at this point on that actually worth it, that has played more than 5 games this year. Seattle, it's just, we saw it last week. They looked so bad at points against the Jets, and then they looked so good at another point. Arizona has been a nice story, but let's be honest, outside of the 30% of Americans that get stuck with regional coverage, if you don't have access to NFL Red Zone, do anybody even know about the Arizona Cardinals right now? And the Rams, and the Rams, look, they're a couple years removed from winning the Super Bowl and going all in. So you expect them to kind of be the team on the downside, but because the rest of the division is so bad and just kind of hanging around, this is the NFC West in a heartbeat. I mean, it's easy to find a team that can win the division, except we don't know which team that's going to be.
You know what? If you guys had to put me on the spot, and I know I picked San Francisco at the beginning of the season, before like they literally became, the epitome of a MASH unit. The Rams, now that they've got their guys back on both sides of the ball, the defense is starting to figure it out, playing a little better. Guys have stepped up, have improved their play. Matthew Stafford at quarter is the best quarterback of any of the teams in the division. They arguably have the best pair of wide receivers in Kupp and Nakua. Williams has done the job at running back. Sean McVay might be the best coach in the division. No disrespect to Kyle Shanahan. He just doesn't have the horses for the rest of the season. So it would not surprise me if when the dust finally settles, it's the Rams who are in first place in that division.
They have the opportunity with those last 2 games. By the way, give credit to the Reds. They finally got draft picks last year, and they're probably going to have the defensive rookie of the year this year, Jared Verse. So, picks actually meant something to them. So we'll see what happens. Back to college football, and we're going to finish this off tonight with a little bit of a rant. All right, guys, it's time for Steven's rant on college flag rivalry, sponsored by 5 Hour Energy. Tums Gummies, and Alpo. We'll get back to our sponsor in just a moment. Baker Mayfield started a trend after planting the flag for his alma mater, OU, Oklahoma University, in 2017 after a win versus Ohio State. Did it right on the out. Fantastic. This is not a rivalry game, FYI. This is a once-in-a-decade event. In fact, it's a once-in-4-decade event. They hadn't met in 40 years in this place. Saturday, though, flag planting got a bit out of hand. And by a bit out of hand, I mean a metric ton out of hand. Ohio State and Michigan got into it after the shocking win by the Wolverines in Columbus 13-10. Smile again, Jay. It was a flag planting by Michigan and a brawl afterwards that included pepper spray. Pepper spray. Hey, Michigan, act like you've been there before. Hey, Ohio State, act like you've been there before. And by that, I mean as gracious losers. You've done that 4 times in a row down in Michigan. Most of your class never actually beat Ohio State, so you should know what it's like to be losers by now. Anyway, while we always know this rivalry means business, you have things that the social media era escalates those players' voices even in college football. Not necessarily a good thing. While Michigan can be wrong or right to plant the flag, and Ohio State can be wrong or right to take that flag away, this does not deserve the biggest of brawls, which brings police and pepper spray involved. Pepper spray should only be involved for the next jackass who decides to run on the field. Kevin Harlan should announce it. Everybody should be happy. I'm looking at you. You know what to do, America, next time. But the game between that team up north and that team up a creek that is not the only flag, that wasn't the only flag planting controversy over the weekend. You had Florida State, NC State, UNC, Clemson, South Carolina, Arizona State, Arizona, all had their separate flag lapses of judgment. And you know what? You've all ruined it. You've ruined it for everyone, guys. What should be used today, once-in-a-lifetime special occasion, has been used as the most trendy of trendiest trends now. It's cute once, but now it pisses the other team off. It pisses the police off who have to break up immature under 21-year-olds. And most importantly, it has pissed Gus Johnson off. And when America can't hear Gus Johnson screaming unintelligibly and he has to be somber, we're not in a good place, America. We surely are not. Also, when ESPN, Fox, NBC, CBS, and ESPN8 The Ocho is hyping Rivalry Week like it's this amazing thing, you have the media treating every game like it's Armageddon. For God's sake. When Baker did it in 2017, unlike when that happened, you're going to see that opponent next year. Rivalry games happen every single year. That's the great thing about college football. And guess what? In 2 years, you get that road game again and you get a chance to put it in that team's face. You don't have to plant the flag and then possibly get death rights 2 years from now. Not necessary. The media overhypes everything, and this is no exception. ESPN bears responsibility too. You hear Joe Tessitore last week just hype up last Friday, good old clean-fashioned hate between Georgia and Georgia Tech. ESPN has Rivalry Week, sponsored by Hampton Hotels. Why would we now have Hampton Hotels associated with brawl? I mean, more than they usually are. I love Hampton Hotels necessarily, but not necessarily the greatest place in the world. Love Hampton Hotels now. Hampton Inn. Stay there, just stay away from all the fighting. Baker even commented on this flag planting this week, saying, let the boys play. They can play, but it doesn't have to include a goddamn flag every time, guys.
Yeah, I'll let you take the lead on this one, since your team was involved in
the
one of these
instigator
situations.
of, because they were up first. Yeah, I said to the rabbi over text that while I felt that Michigan's win over Ohio State in the game, being a 21-point underdog on the road and extending a winning streak to 4 straight against, their arch rival, who also happened to be the number 2 team in the nation at the time, and knocking them out of the conference title game, was worthy of a flag planting. So I understand what the Wolverines were thinking, but I have never been a fan of players celebrating that way in an opponent's house. Celebrating in the end zone by waving the flag around or carrying it while you run around the field is one thing, but zealously attempting to plant it at midfield right on the logo is crossing a line, in my opinion. If college football is a religion, and it's arguably considered one in places like Ann Arbor and Columbus, and plenty of places down south, then the stadium is the church and the logo is the altar. So planting anything on it, like let's say a big blue Michigan flag, is an act of desecration. Not cool. So, of course, things got out of hand and a melee ensued involving dozens of players on both teams and got to the point where punches were thrown, players were dragged down, low lighted by Ohio State defensive end Jack Sawyer, ripping that Michigan flag away from a Wolverine player and throwing it to the ground. Law enforcement officers from both Michigan and Ohio State, along with staff members from each team, stepped in to break up the fighting, but it took several minutes before the teams were fully separated. In the process, as Rabbi noted, players were seen on the ground rubbing their faces due to pepper spray being used by multiple officers in their attempt to quell things. That might rise to the level of excessive use of force, and it is being investigated. Now, back in our MLB spring training show in February, we talked about court stormings in college basketball and the dangers that they pose. Part of the problem is things like this and what we saw not only in Columbus, but across college football last weekend, all fall under a conference's sportsmanship policy, and most of them don't really have any teeth. The Big Ten doesn't start handing out fines for field storming until a school's third offense, after issuing private and then public reprimands. The policy in the Big Ten's bylaws require members to show civility toward all and respect, particularly towards opponents and officials around competitions. The policy also gives broad power to the commissioner and the league office to dole out penalties if it is violated, but the language is broad and vague at the same time. The conference determined that the schools violated the Big Ten sportsmanship policy, and they fined both Ohio State and Michigan $100,000 apiece for what happened after the game, which is couch cushion money to schools with the respective athletic department budgets that they have. But no discipline was handed down to individual players. So where actually is the incentive to stop with these post-rivalry game shenanigans and any potential violence that results from it? The NCAA is no help, as it lacks any type of real authority over big-time college football and has for years, which is why it's fallen to the conferences to handle. And they, to this point in time, have failed epically to do so. The planting of the flag is not a new tradition in college football. As Rabbi noted, we all remember Baker Mayfield and his antics while at Oklahoma, though last weekend may have been the perfect storm of it happening after several games all on the same day due to road teams winning in their rivals' houses. Now, bottom line, we're in an age where violence breaks out all too often when sporting events get heated, and nowhere is that more prevalent and possible than in college football rivalry games where two teams have been beating each other up for 60 minutes after a week-long, and in some cases year-long, build-up to the game over every media platform imaginable. ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips told The Athletic on Monday that this type of stuff, quote, it has no place in football or any sport, and there needs to be repercussions for those who partake in that. That's why it's important for us to get together, commissioners, and set the course moving forward and hold people accountable. Actions speak louder than words, Jim. Let's see if you and your fellow commissioners can actually put your money where your mouth is this time.
Anthony, go ahead.
Yeah, I am a byproduct of a college football rivalry. Obviously, the Iron Bowl lived on in my house growing up. But I'm old fashioned. I'm a guy who grew up on the idea of respect the game but respect your opponent. And in the case of this being a rivalry, like it should never get to the point where we saw it between Michigan and Ohio State with it becoming violent, and in several other places too. Because I do feel like it's one thing to wave the flag, because obviously you got fans of your own school that are on these road games and celebrating that way. But when you actively run to the 50-yard line to plant the flag onto the opposing team's logo, I think that is absolutely crossing the line. It's classless. It's not necessary, because you won the game. You have to brag rights to that rivalry for the foreseeable future, and it's something that should be celebrated. But not to the point where it's mocking your opponent and it's leading to violence and leading to what we saw in several instances last
Amen.
week. I actually just think it's crossing the line. And yeah, we ESPN, Fox, and all these networks, they're hyping up overhype these things. Obviously for TV ratings. And Georgia Tech was an amazing game last weekend. We all were in the group chat talking about that game, and just a great comeback
It
from
just
Georgia.
ended, by the
That
way.
game
I
was
think that just actually ended before we went on air.
yeah, yeah, and, and and I just think back like this. And obviously, I mentioned the Iron Bowl rivalry in my house. Can you imagine the flag being planted after the kick six or 4th and 31 to say the least, and what kind of a fist fight that would have turned into? But it's just like I said, the flag planting thing. It's childish. It's silly. It's really uncalled for. And I get when the players get a big win, and like we saw in between Michigan and Ohio State particularly. And the emotions are high against the team that hated arch nemesis. You build up all year long to beat him. And just think about this. Ryan Day making his team in the college football playoff, and people are talking about firing him because he can't beat the Wolverines, which just
That's
tells
a
you
whole
everything
different
else.
conversation, Anthony, for
Yeah,
the time.
but I'm just talking about like
Get into
how,
that now.
yeah, but I'm just talking about rivalries as a whole
Yeah.
and how it's really built into it. But there's got to be a respect line,
Yeah.
as far for the players as far as competition. It's like yeah, we want to win, we want to beat the hell out of you. That's obviously, but we're not going to cross the line to the point where the punches are thrown and we're seeing pepper spray getting sprayed into the place in the face of several players
Mhm.
to where they're literally bent. We'll see them visibly bent over, gasping for air and rubbing their eyes because some of that stuff got into it. And I don't know if anybody been actually sprayed with pepper spray or been around it. It is very, very hard to breathe when the moment you inhale it one time. It is very difficult. And yes, college football has to do something. I mean, I want to see these conferences just put down information and say, look, we understand the emotions, the raw, uh, the fight, the rawness of winning these rivalry games, but there's got to be a line you don't cross. And the flag planting, I just think, is clearly crossing a line of respect, and it should be toned down just a little bit. It should never get to that point that we saw last week in some of these games.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, even if you don't respect your rival because it is a rival and you hate them, and it's often enough that respect goes out the window when hate's involved. Respect the game. You know what I'm saying? You don't want to respect your rival. You don't want to respect, their house, or whatever, or their fan base or whatever. If you beat them like that, whatever. I don't agree with that, but at the bare minimum, respect the game. As Anthony said, stuff like that has no place in the game.
Totally agree on both your points, guys. Before we actually close up tonight, Jay, I know we'll talk about the post that you that you shared on Twitter in a moment, but with the death this week of St. John's legendary head coach Lou Carnesecca, talk about what the man with some of the greatest coaching in the world of college basketball history and some of the least fashionable sweaters in American history meant to you in the world of sports.
Part of the 85-86 season, the one where Louis took St. John's to the Final Four, and you had three Big East teams in the Final Four, where ultimately it was Georgetown and Villanova. That is what basically that to me that season is what really got people hooked on the Big East Conference. It's where the Big East Conference really finally made an impact. St. John's had always billed itself as New York's college basketball team, that playing their games in the Garden. Um, you know, uh, it's kind of interesting how Louis wound up at St. John's, and he came on board as an assistant, coached after his mentor left, and then caught a little bit of the pro bug, went to the ABA, coached the Nets for a while, didn't really work out. He didn't really enjoy it as much as he thought he would. And, And when he left the ABA, the guy who replaced him at St. John's was being let go. So Louis was able to actually step back in and take over the reins as St. John's head coach. And if not for that fortuitous piece of timing, I don't know that he probably wouldn't be remembered at all. Not the way he is, and the way he will always be remembered and revered. Not just by those of us who spent their college years at Alumni Hall before it was called Carnesecca Arena. Um, it's it's hard to kind of put into words what it's like to be around, what it was like to be around him. You know, as great a coach as Louis was, he was probably a greater character. Um, Back when the Big East was populated by really high impact character coaches. You know, you're talking about him. You're talking about Raleigh Massimino at Villanova. You had John Thompson at Georgetown. Jim Boeheim at Syracuse. PJ Carlissimo. I can go on and on. It was a great era in college basketball, and to come in right into school right after that, um, when St. John's maybe had taken a little bit of a step back, but not completely off the national radar. And that was probably largely due to Louis because his outsized personality was as much a part of what made St. John's basketball great as his ability to coach that team on the court, which was he's deserving of the Hall of Fame recognition that he got. Um, Calling St. John's games for the campus radio station, traveling with the team, calling games at Alumni Hall, at Madison Square Garden, on the road at Big East games, NCAA tournament teams, games, NIT games. Constantly, I was around him often enough to kind of have an up close and personal view of the way to see who Louis really was, both on and off the court. Um, I'm going to repeat this later, but it was an honor and a privilege to have been at St. John's during his time there, in his heyday there, to just be around him, talk a little basketball with him, just to be around him. He was one of the great personalities, great coaches, and one of the great guys. He was, and I'm going to say it again later, he was St. John's.
I think you said it perfectly. A character in his own right, somebody who made just the Big East back in the 70s and 80s. So we're going to miss him a lot in terms of just his presence. Anthony, you got anything to say for a wrap up?
I was at the Barclays Center. I sent you guys the moment of silence they had for a second before the game. For the younger kids out there, I would recommend. There's ESPN did a 30 for 30 several years back. A requiem for the Big East, and it's pretty much talked about the original Big East Conference and how ESPN made it a feature Monday night stable of the when it was itself in its infancy. Yep. And you saw those classic Big East games and I would tell the young generation to look into that. It's a lot of great basketball history. You think about some of the great players that came out of St. John's. You talk about Mark Jackson, Chris Mullin, Von Artez. And St. John's has always been looked at as New York's college basketball team, even though New York doesn't necessarily have an official college basketball team, but St. John's, whether it's the Red Men or the Red Storm, they were always kind of looked at our college basketball team. Whether it was that, formerly called Alumni Hall, now called Carnesecca Arena, or Madison Square Garden, because they played some of their home games there and in the official home in the Big East tournament. And the first thing that came to my mind was the sweater game. That was the game that obviously when you talk about Big East, and one of the things I thought about during that moment of silence was, I wonder if Coach Thompson met him at the gates with a matching sweater, just to say, "Hey, welcome, hey, nice to see you again, buddy." Something like that came to my mind. And Jay, you had the personal experience of being around him, and I've heard so many stories about not just a great basketball mind, but a great human being all together. So, my condolences. Obviously, you're a member of the St. John community, and you and all the alumni there, and even some of the current students and faculty there. But as a basketball fan as a whole, I think he's going to be greatly missed by everyone.
Yeah. Imagine if you're the godfather of the Big East, which it was known as, and you had characters in that Big East time, such as Dave Gavitt, who is always going to be a character all those years as the commissioner, John Thompson, Rolly Massimino, Jim Boeheim, Jim Calhoun, TJ Carissimo, and a guy who got the blessing of Mr. Carnesecca going back to the Big East from his time there with Pitino. So a very, very character amongst characters out there, and Bryant represents a very nice golden age of college basketball. Yeah. So you'll miss him dearly. All right, for Jay Kaplan and Anthony Strait, I myself am a man who will never be considered for a golden at bat, a golden microphone, or anything to even do with the golden arches. Stephen Rabinowitz. I'm also not part of your Spotify rap, by the way. No, that's not me. No. YouTube.com/on the sports lines. That's how you see us on demand. Once in a while, we'll be live on Facebook.com/on the sports lines and on Twitter.
Our Twitter handle is at ONTH Sports Lines, where you'll find a link to each new show, like tonight's, along with tidbits and nuggets from the world of sports that we think are worth your time to check out. This week, there is a link to a great piece in The Athletic by Dana O'Neill, one of the best college basketball writers of our generation, on the passing of legendary St. John's basketball coach Lou Carnesecca over Thanksgiving weekend. There is an image in that story of Carnesecca kneeling in a game where St. John's wound up was playing Duke. That game was the 1991 Midwest Regionals Finals. I was there calling that game at the Pontiac Silverdome for WSJU Radio. For those of us like me who proudly called ourselves Johnnies, it was an honor and privilege to have known and talked a little ball with the Hall of Famer we all affectionately called Louie. As I said earlier, he was St. John's, and he will be sorely, sorely missed.
Back next week. Good night, and I'm making this a thing. Happy CFP selection weekend, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Bye, everyone.